What happens when the most ruthless female billionaire on Wall Street is forced to trade her empire for a husband who buys his groceries on layaway? Chloe Sterling spent 10 years building a logistics dynasty, crushing rivals with a single signature. But when a cruel family ultimatum forces her to marry a destitute mechanic with a 6-year-old daughter just to keep her CEO title, she thinks her life is over. She thinks she's bringing a peasant into her glass castle. She doesn't know that the quiet man fixing her sink is secretly the apex predator of global finance, and he's about to flip her entire world upside down. The boardroom of Sterling Global was 34 floors above Manhattan, a glass box where careers were made and destroyed before the morning coffee went cold. At the head of the long mahogany table sat Chloe Sterling. At 32, she was the youngest female CEO in the Fortune 500. She wore a tailored charcoal Tom Ford suit that looked like armor, her icy blue eyes scanning the quarterly reports with the precision of a hawk. "Richard Caldwell is making another aggressive push," her CFO muttered, sliding a thick dossier across the table. "He's buying up proxy shares. If we don't secure the merger with the European division, Caldwell's hostile takeover could trigger a board vote by next month." Chloe didn't blink. "Let Richard play in the sandbox. We are not selling, and we are not merging on his terms. Liquidate the underperforming assets in the Midwest and buy back our shares. I want a fortress around this company." She adjourned the meeting, leaving the executives scrambling. But the moment the heavy glass doors sealed behind her, her phone buzzed. It was a private number. "Grandfather?" Chloe answered, her tone softening just a fraction, though her posture remained rigid. "My office. Now," Arthur Sterling rasped. The patriarch of the Sterling family was 81. Tethered to an oxygen tank, but still wielding influence like a sledgehammer. 20 minutes later, Chloe stood in his dimly lit study, surrounded by leather-bound books and the suffocating scent of cigar smoke and old regret. "You're losing your grip on the board, Chloe," Arthur coughed, glaring at her from his wingback chair. "Caldwell is circling like a vulture. The shareholders want stability. They want to see you anchored." "I am anchored to this company," Chloe fired back. "I tripled our valuation in 3 years." "Valuation isn't legacy." Arthur slammed his cane into the Persian rug. "I hold the controlling 51% of the voting shares in the family trust, and I am transferring them to you on one condition." Chloe's heart stopped. "What condition?" "You will marry, not Caldwell, not one of these Wall Street snakes. 25 years ago, a man named Jonathan Cross pulled me from a burning vehicle on the Pacific Coast Highway. I promised him half my fortune. He refused. He died last year in a construction accident, leaving behind a son and a young granddaughter. They are living in poverty in Queens. You will marry the son, Nathaniel Cross. You will adopt his daughter. You will give them the Sterling protection, and in return, the trust is yours." Chloe laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You're joking. You want me to marry a charity case? A construction worker's son? Grandfather, this is corporate suicide. The press will tear us apart." "The papers are drawn," Arthur said coldly, sliding a leather folder onto his desk. "Marry Nathaniel Cross by Friday, or I sell my 51% to Richard Caldwell." The silence in the room was deafening. Chloe looked at the folder, feeling the walls of her empire closing in. She had sacrificed her youth, her personal life, and her peace of mind for Sterling Global. She couldn't let it fall to Caldwell. "Fine," she whispered, her voice venomous. "Where is he?" 2 hours later, Chloe's sleek black Maybach pulled up to a crumbling brick apartment building in the deepest, most neglected pocket of Queens. The street was lined with overflowing dumpsters and rusted cars. Chloe stepped out, her Louboutin heels clicking against the cracked pavement, looking utterly alien in her designer suit. Her bodyguard, Davis, shadowed her closely. She climbed 3 flights of stairs that smelled of stale beer and boiled cabbage, finally stopping at apartment 3B. She knocked. The door creaked open to reveal a man who looked like he had been carved out of exhaustion. Nathaniel Cross was tall, broad-shouldered, and covered in engine grease. He wore a faded gray t-shirt and ripped denim. His dark hair was messy, falling over deep-set, striking green eyes that held an unnerving stillness. He didn't look intimidated by the billionaire standing in his doorway. He just looked tired. "Can I help you?" His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone. "Are you Nathaniel?" Chloe asked, her nose wrinkling slightly at the smell of motor oil. Before he could answer, a little girl with messy pigtails and a missing front tooth peeked out from behind his legs. She was holding a battered, stuffed rabbit. "Daddy, is she the lady from the TV?" Nathaniel gently pushed the girl back inside. "Go watch your cartoons, Lily. Give me a minute." He turned back to Chloe. "Who's asking?" "I am Chloe Sterling, Arthur Sterling's granddaughter." Nathaniel's expression didn't shift. He wiped his greasy hands on a rag. "Arthur, right," he called. "Said you were coming." "Then you know why I'm here at you," Chloe said, stepping into the cramped apartment without being invited. The furniture was thrifted, the wallpaper was peeling, but it was obsessively clean. "Let me make this perfectly clear, Mr. Cross. This is a transaction. You will sign a prenuptial agreement. You will receive a monthly stipend of $50,000. Your daughter will be placed in the best private school in Manhattan. In exchange, you will pose as my devoted husband in public. You will not interfere with my life, and you will stay out of my way." Nathaniel leaned against the doorframe, watching her with a calm, piercing gaze that made Chloe inexplicably uncomfortable. Most men cowed before her. Nathaniel just looked at her like she was a loud, misbehaving bird. $50,000 a month, Nathaniel repeated, his tone flat. "Is it not enough?" Chloe snapped, pulling out her checkbook. "Name your price. I don't care. I just need this done." Nathaniel glanced back into the apartment, his eyes lingering on Lily, who was sitting on a patched-up sofa. A shadow passed over his face, a brief, dark flash of something incredibly dangerous, before it vanished back into the exhausted mechanic persona. "I don't want your money, Miss Sterling," Nathaniel said quietly, "but Lily needs a safe place, a secure place, somewhere with walls higher than this." Chloe frowned, missing the hidden weight in his words. "My penthouse has state-of-the-art security. You'll be fine." "Good," Nathaniel said. He tossed the grease rag onto a side table. "I'll sign your contract." 3 days later, the marriage was finalized in a sterile, 5-minute courthouse ceremony. Chloe wore a white business suit. Nathaniel wore a cheap, ill-fitting rental tuxedo. The only witness was Arthur's lawyer. That evening, Nathaniel and Lily moved into Chloe's sprawling, 10,000-square-foot penthouse overlooking Central Park. "These are your quarters," Chloe said, gesturing to the east wing of the apartment. "Lily's room is next to yours. I sleep in the west wing. We do not cross paths after 9 p.m. The kitchen is shared, but I have a private chef who prepares my meals. If you need anything, speak to my assistant." Lily was spinning in circles in the massive marble foyer, her eyes wide. "Daddy, the floor is super shiny. You can slide in your socks." Nathaniel smiled, a genuine, warm expression that momentarily transformed his rough face. "Careful, Bug. Don't break anything." He looked at Chloe. "Thank you for the space." "It's a contract," she replied coldly, turning on her heel. "Remember the rules." For the first 2 weeks, they lived like ghosts, haunting the same mansion. Chloe worked grueling 18-hour days, fighting off Richard Caldwell's relentless corporate sabotage. Her shipping lines in the Pacific were suddenly tied up in bureaucratic red tape, costing her millions daily. The stress was eating her alive. She began noticing odd things about her new husband. Despite the $50,000 monthly stipend she deposited into an account for him, Nathaniel never touched it. He still woke up at 5 a.m., but instead of going to a garage, he made breakfast for Lily, packed her lunch for her new elite private school, and spent hours sitting on the balcony with a cheap burner phone and a worn leather notebook. One evening, Chloe came home early, nursing a massive migraine. Her deal with Omnicorp, a massive semiconductor manufacturer, had fallen through. Caldwell had outbid her, bribing the Omnicorp executives. She walked into the kitchen and stopped. The private chef was gone. Instead, Nathaniel was standing at the industrial stove, stirring a pot of homemade tomato soup. He wore a simple black t-shirt that stretched tightly over his back. "Chef is off today," Nathaniel said without turning around. "Lily wanted grilled cheese. There's enough if you want some." "I don't eat carbs," Chloe muttered, dropping her briefcase onto the marble island. She rubbed her temples. "And I don't have time to eat. Omnicorp just pulled out of our supply chain agreement. We're bleeding capital." Nathaniel slowly turned down the heat on the stove. Omnicorp? The Seattle branch? Chloe laughed bitterly. Yes, the Seattle branch. Not that you would understand. It's corporate politics, Nathaniel. Not a broken carburetor. Nathaniel didn't react to the insult. He just plated a grilled cheese sandwich, cut off the crusts for Lily, and set it on the counter. Corporate politics usually comes down to leverage. Who's the CEO of Omnicorp? Victor Vance? Victor Harrison, Chloe corrected, too tired to care why he was asking. He's in Richard Caldwell's pocket. Right, Harrison, Nathaniel murmured. He wiped his hands on a towel. Excuse me, I need to make a quick call, checking in on my old boss at the garage. Nathaniel walked out onto the freezing terrace, sliding the glass door shut behind him. He pulled the cheap burner phone from his pocket. The moment the glass door sealed, his posture changed. The tired, slumping mechanic vanished. His spine straightened, his shoulders squared, and his green eyes turned cold and predatory. He dialed a 12-digit encrypted number. It was answered on the first ring. Sir? A crisp British voice spoke. Sebastian, Nathaniel said, his voice dropping an octave into a low, terrifying register. I need you to pull the leverage file on Victor Harrison at Omnicorp. Right away, Mr. Cross. Ah, yes. We hold the debt on his offshore gambling accounts in Macau, roughly 40 million in arrears. We also have the satellite photos of his undocumented meetings with the Regulatory Commission. Call him, Nathaniel commanded softly, watching the Manhattan skyline. Tell him, N.H. Vanguard is displeased. Tell him if he doesn't sign the exclusive supply chain contract with Sterling Global by 8 a.m. tomorrow, I will personally liquidate his life. He will be begging for pennies on the street. Understood, sir. Shall I also make a move on Richard Caldwell? Not yet, Nathaniel said, his eyes narrowing as he looked through the glass at Chloe, who was massaging her temples in the kitchen. Let Caldwell play his hand a little longer. I want to see his entire network before I burn it to the ground. Yes, Mr. Cross. How is Miss Lily? She's safe, Nathaniel said, his voice softening slightly. The Sterling penthouse is a fortress. Whoever put the hit out on Sarah hasn't tracked us here. Maintaining the cover is our top priority. Very good, sir. Nathaniel hung up. He took a deep breath, letting the terrifying aura of the world's most powerful shadow billionaire bleed away, replacing it with the docile, quiet mechanic. He walked back inside. Garage is doing fine, he told Chloe. The next morning, Chloe was jolted awake by her phone ringing frantically. It was her CFO. Chloe, turn on CNBC. Now. Chloe scrambled for the remote. The news ticker at the bottom of the screen was flashing red. Breaking. Omnicorp reverses decision overnight. Signs exclusive 10-year below-market contract with Sterling Global. CEO Victor Harrison cites unforeseen strategic alignments. Chloe sat in bed, utterly paralyzed. Below market? Harrison hated her. Why would he suddenly hand her the deal of a lifetime? She walked out into the living room in a daze. Nathaniel was sitting on the rug, letting Lily put pink butterfly hair clips into his dark hair. He looked ridiculous. He looked completely harmless. Morning, Nathaniel said, perfectly deadpan, a pink butterfly clipped to his bangs. Coffee's in the pot. Chloe stared at him, then at the news on her iPad. It had to be a coincidence. It was the only logical explanation. 2 months into the arrangement, the facade of their marriage was put to the ultimate test. The Sterling Annual Charity Gala. It was the social event of the season, a snake pit of billionaires, politicians, and socialites. You don't have to speak, Chloe instructed Nathaniel as they rode down in the private elevator. She was wearing a breathtaking emerald green silk gown that clung to her curves, a fortune in diamonds resting on her collarbone. Nathaniel wore a bespoke black tuxedo that Chloe had ordered for him. When he had stepped out of his room, Chloe had literally stopped breathing for a second. The tailored lines of the suit clung to his broad chest and narrow waist. With his hair slicked back, he didn't look like a mechanic. He looked like James Bond. It unnerved her deeply. Just smile, nod, and let me do the talking, she continued, regaining her composure. Caldwell will be there. He will try to provoke you. He wants to prove to the board that my marriage is a sham and that I'm mentally unstable for marrying a working-class man. I've dealt with bullies before, Nathaniel said mildly, adjusting his cuffs. Not bullies like Richard Caldwell. He destroys lives for sport. The ballroom at the Plaza Hotel was glittering with crystal chandeliers and overflowing with orchids. The moment Chloe and Nathaniel entered, the room went silent. Flashbulbs erupted. Whispers cascaded through the crowd like a wave. That's him? The charity case? I heard she found him living in a dumpster. He cleans up well, but look at his hands. Caroused. Chloe kept her chin high, her arm looped stiffly through Nathaniel's. To his credit, Nathaniel was a rock. His heart rate, which she could feel against her arm, was terrifyingly slow and steady. Halfway through the evening, the confrontation Chloe dreaded finally happened. Richard Caldwell, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch, swaggered over with two of his sycophant executives. "Chloe, darling," Caldwell purred, his eyes raking over her body before dismissing Nathaniel entirely. "You look spectacular. Though I must admit, I'm surprised you brought the help to such a sophisticated event." Chloe's eyes flashed. "Richard, leave." "Oh, come now. I just want to meet the lucky man." Caldwell finally turned his gaze to Nathaniel, a sneer playing on his lips. "Nathaniel, is it? I hear you fix cars. Fascinating. Tell me, do you even know what a derivative is? Or do you just know how to change a tire?" The executive snickered. Chloe stepped forward, fury rising in her throat, but Nathaniel gently placed a hand on her waist, stopping her. Nathaniel looked at Caldwell. For the first time since Chloe had met him, Nathaniel didn't look tired. His green eyes locked onto Caldwell's with an intensity that seemed to drop the temperature in the room. "I know enough," Nathaniel said, his voice quiet, smooth, and dangerously calm. Caldwell chuckled, sipping his scotch. "Is that right? You know my driver's Bentley has been making a rattling noise. Maybe I can slip you $100 to take a look under the hood later?" Nathaniel didn't blink. He reached out, his calloused fingers slowly plucking the crystal tumbler of scotch right out of Caldwell's hand. He did it so smoothly, so authoritatively, that Caldwell was too stunned to resist. Nathaniel swirled the expensive liquid, looking at it thoughtfully. Then he took a step closer to Caldwell, invading his personal space. "A derivative, Richard," Nathaniel said softly, so only Chloe and Caldwell could hear, "is a financial contract whose value is reliant upon an underlying asset. Much like how your company's current stock valuation is entirely reliant on the fabricated Q3 earnings report you filed 2 weeks ago in the Cayman Islands." Caldwell's smug smile vanished instantly. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick ghost. "How?" Caldwell stammered, his eyes darting around in panic. "Who told you?" "I also know," Nathaniel continued, his voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of an executioner's blade, "that you leveraged your own mother's estate to cover your margin calls last Tuesday. If the SEC were to receive an anonymous tip regarding the offshore accounts you've hidden under a shell company in Belize, you wouldn't just lose your company. You'd go to federal prison for 20 years. Nathaniel gently pressed the glass back into Caldwell's trembling hand. "Fix your own Bentley, Richard," Nathaniel smiled, a cold, empty expression, "and stay away from my wife." Caldwell looked terrified. He didn't say another word. He practically sprinted away, abandoning his executives, desperate to get out of the ballroom. Chloe stood frozen, her mind spinning wildly. She stared at Nathaniel, who had already gone back to looking at the hors d'oeuvres table with mild interest. "What did you just say to him?" Chloe demanded, grabbing his arm and pulling him into a quiet alcove behind a pillar. Caldwell looked like he was going to vomit. "What did you say?" "I just told him a joke I heard at the garage." Nathaniel shrugged innocently. "Don't lie to me," she hissed. Her eyes darted down to the hand holding her arm. For the first time, she really looked at it. Yes, there were calluses, but they weren't haphazard. They were precise, like someone who practiced martial arts, not someone who slipped wrenches. And then she saw the watch. Part of her agreement was buying him a wardrobe, but he had insisted on wearing his own watch. She had assumed it was some cheap knockoff. But under the bright chandelier light, she recognized the intricate, hand-painted dial and the specific, flawless rotation of the gears. It was a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. But not just any model. It was the prototype, a watch that was rumored to have been sold at a secret auction in Geneva to an anonymous buyer for $31 million. Nathaniel, Chloe breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs as she looked up into his calm, unreadable eyes. Who exactly are you? The morning after the gala, the atmosphere in the penthouse was thick enough to choke on. Chloe sat at the marble kitchen island, her untouched espresso cooling rapidly. She watched Nathaniel. He was at the stove again, wearing a faded gray Henley, flipping blueberry pancakes for Lily. He looked entirely domestic, completely unbothered. But Chloe wasn't fooled anymore. She had spent the entire night tearing through the internet, making calls to her most discreet fixers. She had hired Donovan Croft, a former MI6 operative, who now ran corporate intelligence for Wall Street's elite. Donovan had called her at 4 a.m. His voice had been laced with a rare, genuine panic. Chloe, call off the search, Donovan had warned. Nathaniel Cross doesn't exist. The social security number was generated 3 years ago. His work history is a shell. But whoever built his ghost profile is using military-grade encryption. When I tried to dig into the vehicle accident that supposedly killed his father, my servers were hit by a retaliatory cyber attack. It wiped my hard drives in 60 seconds. You are sleeping next to a ghost, Chloe. A very dangerous one. Now, she watched the ghost pour syrup onto a plate. Did you sleep well? Nathaniel asked, bringing the plate to Lily, who was busy coloring in a book. Not really, Chloe said, her voice tight. I was too busy thinking about horology, specifically $30 million Patek Philippe prototypes. Nathaniel paused, the spatula resting lightly in his hand. He didn't look at her, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop. It's a replica. I bought it in Chinatown for $50. Don't insult my intelligence, Chloe snapped, standing up. You terrified Richard Caldwell into submission with a whisper. You possess knowledge of offshore Cayman accounts that even my billion-dollar intelligence division couldn't find. And Donovan Croft tells me you don't exist. Nathaniel finally turned to face her. The warm, fatherly facade stripped away instantly, revealing the cold, calculating predator beneath. Donovan Croft is sloppy. He left a digital footprint the size of Texas when he tried to breach the Pentagon's back doors looking for my military records. You should fire him. Chloe's breath hitched. Who are you? Before Nathaniel could answer, Chloe's phone erupted. It was Davis, her head of security. She answered it, keeping her eyes locked on Nathaniel. Miss Sterling, we have a code red, Davis yelled over the sound of screeching tires. Caldwell has lost his mind. His margin calls hit this morning. He's completely bankrupt. He's hired a private tactical firm mercenaries. They just breached the lobby of the Sterling building. They're looking for the ledger drives you keep in the penthouse safe. They're coming up the private elevator right now. Chloe's blood ran cold. The penthouse? Davis, Lily is here. I'm locked out of the system. They bypassed the biometric scanners. Get out of there, Chloe. Now. The line went dead. Chloe dropped the phone, panic seizing her chest. Caldwell sent mercenaries. They're coming up the elevator. We have to get to the panic room. She lunged toward Lily, but Nathaniel was already moving. He didn't look panicked. He looked furious. The kind of quiet, apocalyptic fury that precedes a natural disaster. Lily, Bug, Nathaniel said smoothly, his voice betraying absolutely no fear. Grab your coloring book. We're going to play the quiet game in the big metal closet. Okay, Daddy, Lily chirped, grabbing her crayons. Nathaniel ushered them both into the reinforced steel panic room hidden behind the library bookshelf. As Chloe stepped inside, she turned back to him. Nathaniel, come on! I'll be right there, he said softly. He pulled a matte black, suppressed Heckler and Coke USP tactical pistol from beneath the false bottom of a nearby umbrella stand. Chloe stared at the weapon, her mind short-circuiting. Lock the door, Nathaniel commanded. Do not open it until I say the word Prometheus. He slammed the heavy steel door shut, plunging Chloe and Lily into the dimly lit, soundproof room. Chloe watched through the small, bulletproof glass viewport. The private elevator chimed, the polished steel doors slid open, and 4 men in heavy tactical gear stepped into the foyer. They were armed with compact submachine guns, moving with terrifying military precision. but they were stepping into a slaughterhouse. Nathaniel didn't hide. He stood in the center of the vast living room, a solitary figure in a gray Henley. The mercenaries raised their weapons, but Nathaniel was impossibly fast. He moved with a brutal, kinetic efficiency. 2 suppressed shots echoed through the glass, taking out the knee of the first man and the shoulder of the second before they could even pull their triggers. The remaining 2 opened fire, shattering the floor-to-ceiling windows and shredding the million-dollar artwork. Nathaniel rolled behind the marble island, returning fire with lethal accuracy. It wasn't a firefight, it was a clinical dismantling. Within 45 seconds, all 4 men were incapacitated, writhing on the floor, groaning in agony. Nathaniel walked over to the leader, kicking his weapon away. He knelt down, pressing the searing hot suppressor of his pistol against the man's neck. The man screamed. "Who gave the order?" Nathaniel whispered. "Caldwell," the man choked out. He said, if we didn't get the ledgers, we were supposed to take the kid, hold her for ransom." Through the glass, Chloe saw Nathaniel's posture go rigid. The atmosphere shifted from defensive to entirely murderous. Suddenly, the shattered glass doors of the terrace blew open. 6 men in impeccably tailored dark suits rappelled down from the roof, securing the room in seconds. They weren't police. They moved like elite Secret Service. A tall, distinguished man with silver hair and a British accent stepped over the broken glass. It was Sebastian. "Perimeter secure, sir," Sebastian said, bowing slightly to Nathaniel. "The local authorities have been diverted. A cleanup crew is en route. Shall I send a team to extract Mr. Caldwell?" "No," Nathaniel said, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "Bring him to the Sterling boardroom. I want him breathing when I get there." Nathaniel turned, walked to the panic room, and tapped on the glass. Prometheus. Chloe opened the door, her hands shaking violently. She stepped out, shielding Lily's eyes from the blood on the marble floor. Sebastian immediately stepped forward, gently taking Lily's hand. "Miss Lily, shall we go look at the helicopters on the roof?" Once Lily was gone, Chloe turned to her husband. The grease-stained mechanic was dead. Standing before her was a king. "My name is not Nathaniel Cross," he said quietly, holstering the weapon. "My name is Nathaniel Harrison Vanguard. I am the founder and sole proprietor of NH Vanguard Holdings." Chloe's knees nearly buckled. NH Vanguard was a ghost entity. It was the white whale of Wall Street, a sovereign wealth fund so massive it dictated the GDP of small nations. It was the invisible hand that moved global markets, funded revolutions, and owned the debts of half the Fortune 500. It was rumored to be run by a ruthless, reclusive trillionaire who had never been photographed. "You," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. "You're Vanguard. You own the banks that own my banks." "Yes," Nathaniel said. "Why?" Chloe demanded, tears of shock pricking her eyes. "Why pretend to be a mechanic? Why live in a slum? Why marry me for $50,000 a month when you could buy Manhattan with a stroke of a pen?" Nathaniel's eyes darkened with a profound, suffocating grief. "Because 3 years ago, a Russian syndicate tried to assassinate me to erase a sovereign debt. They missed me. They hit my wife, Sarah's, car instead." Chloe gasped, covering her mouth. "I buried my wife in a closed casket," Nathaniel continued, his voice cold and hollow. "The syndicate was hunting for Lily to finish the bloodline. So, I erased us. I scrubbed my identity, took my daughter to the poorest neighborhood in Queens, and covered myself in engine grease. Vanguard operated from the shadows through Sebastian. But my grandfather," Chloe stammered. "The will, the ultimatum." "Arthur knew," Nathaniel said. "Arthur Sterling was one of my earliest mentors. When he learned the syndicate was closing in on my location in Queens, he offered me a solution: the ultimate cover. Who would ever look for the phantom trillionaire of global finance hiding in plain sight as the pathetic, charity case husband of the most famous, heavily guarded female CEO in America? Chloe realized the sheer brilliance of it. The blinding spotlight of her celebrity was the perfect shadow for him to hide in. He forced the marriage to protect you, Chloe realized. But why did he threaten to give the company to Caldwell if I refused? Because Arthur knew you needed protection too. Nathaniel stepped closer, his green eyes burning into hers. He knew Caldwell was plotting a hostile takeover. He knew Caldwell was dangerous. Arthur didn't just give me a place to hide, Chloe. He gave you a sword. He gave you me. 2 hours later, the boardroom of Sterling Global was dead silent. The panoramic windows overlooked a city that was oblivious to the tectonic shift in power occurring high above it. Richard Caldwell was strapped to a leather chair at the end of the long mahogany table, his face bruised, his clothes torn. He was hyperventilating, surrounded by Sebastian's elite guards. The double doors swung open. Chloe walked in, wearing a sharp, crimson designer suit, looking like an empress. But it was the man walking beside her who made Caldwell whimper. Nathaniel wore a bespoke charcoal three-piece suit that radiated authority. The Patek Philippe gleamed on his wrist. He was no longer the mechanic. He was the apex predator, and he was finally off his leash. Chloe took her seat at the head of the table. Nathaniel didn't sit. He walked slowly around the table, stopping directly behind Caldwell. "You sent armed men into a home where my daughter was sleeping," Nathaniel said. The volume of his voice was low, but it rattled the glass of the boardroom windows. "I didn't know!" Caldwell sobbed, sweat pouring down his face. "I swear to God, Cross, I thought you were just a grease monkey. I just wanted the ledgers. I didn't know." "My name is Vanguard," Nathaniel corrected softly. Caldwell stopped breathing, his eyes bugged out of his head, darting wildly between Chloe and the man standing behind him. Vanguard? No. No, that's impossible. Vanguard is a myth. Nathaniel leaned down, resting his hands on the back of Caldwell's chair. "Sebastian, run the protocol." Sebastian stepped forward with a tablet. "Executing, sir." "Richard," Nathaniel whispered into Caldwell's ear, "as of 30 seconds ago, NH Vanguard Holdings has initiated a hostile buyout of every single one of your corporate debts. We have frozen your offshore accounts, liquidated your real estate portfolios, and submitted your encrypted emails detailing your embezzlement to the Department of Justice." Caldwell began to weep hysterically. "Please, I'll give you everything. I'll sign the company over to Sterling Global. Just don't destroy me." "You're already destroyed," Chloe said coldly from the head of the table. "You're just waiting for the concrete to hit you." "The FBI is currently raiding your offices downstairs," Nathaniel added, checking his prototype watch. "You have about 4 minutes before they come up here to arrest you. I suggest you use that time to pray." Nathaniel nodded to Sebastian, who hauled the blubbering Caldwell out of the boardroom to meet the federal agents. When the doors closed, leaving them alone, the heavy, suffocating tension in the room slowly dissipated. Chloe leaned back in her leather chair, exhausted, exhilarated, and utterly overwhelmed. She looked down at the massive table. "So," Chloe breathed, breaking the silence, "the mechanic is a trillionaire. The marriage was a tactical alliance. And my grandfather is the greatest chess player on earth." Nathaniel walked over to the head of the table, stopping beside her chair. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded piece of heavy parchment. He tossed it onto the table. It was their prenuptial agreement, the contract that dictated they live as ghosts, separated by wings of a penthouse. "The Russian syndicate that killed Sarah?" Nathaniel said quietly. "Sebastian located their leadership an hour ago. They've been dismantled. The threat is gone. I don't need to hide anymore." Chloe looked at the prenup, then up at his striking green eyes. "Which means our contract is fulfilled. You have your freedom. You and Lily can go back to your real lives." A strange, painful knot tightened in Chloe's chest. For the last 2 months, she had grown accustomed to the quiet presence in her home. The smell of homemade dinner, the sight of Lily running across the marble floors, the grounding stability of a man who didn't care about her money. She realized, with a sudden jolt of clarity, that she didn't want the ghost to leave. Nathaniel reached out, his calloused fingers gently resting on the edge of the prenuptial agreement. "I've spent the last 3 years in the dark, Chloe, building walls, trusting no one. I married you because it was a strategic imperative." He slowly tore the contract in half. "But standing in that penthouse today," Nathaniel continued, his voice losing its cold edge, replaced by a raw, burning intensity, "watching you step in front of my daughter to protect her from armed men, I realized something. You didn't just give me a place to hide, you gave me a home." Chloe stood up slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. She was a billionaire CEO. She crushed rivals for breakfast. But standing inches from this man, she felt entirely defenseless. "You told me once," Nathaniel murmured, his hand moving from the torn contract to gently trace the line of her jaw, "that this was corporate politics, a transaction." "I was wrong," Chloe whispered, leaning into his touch. "Good," Nathaniel said, a slow, breathtaking smile finally breaking across his face. "Because I don't want to be your business partner, Chloe. I want to be your husband." He leaned in, and when his lips met hers, it wasn't a transaction. It was an absolute, world-tilting surrender. It was the colliding of two empires, a fusion of power and passion that sent a shockwave through her entire being. Chloe grabbed the lapels of his suit, pulling him closer, anchoring herself to the most powerful man in the world, who also happened to make excellent blueberry pancakes. 6 months later, the boardroom of Sterling Global was once again filled with executives. But the atmosphere was radically different. There was no fear, no talk of hostile takeovers. Chloe stood at the head of the table, projecting the quarterly earnings. They hadn't just tripled, they had shattered global records, merging the logistics infrastructure of Sterling Global with the infinite capital of NH. Vanguard had created an unstoppable financial leviathan. The heavy glass doors swung open. Nathaniel walked in, carrying Lily on his shoulders. Lily was wearing a tiny, custom-made suit that matched her mother's, holding a stuffed rabbit in one hand and a stock portfolio in the other. "Sorry we're late," Nathaniel smiled, setting Lily down. He walked over to Chloe, pressing a kiss to her temple in front of the entire stunned board of directors. Someone insisted on stopping for ice cream before the board meeting. "Ice cream is good for brain power, Daddy," Lily announced, climbing into a leather chair next to Chloe. Chloe looked at the executives, then at her daughter, and finally at the man who had flipped her entire world upside down. She smiled a genuine, radiant smile that no amount of money could ever buy. "Let's continue the meeting," Chloe said, her voice ringing with absolute confidence. "We have an empire to run." What a wild, heart-pounding journey, from a forced marriage built on a cold corporate contract to the ultimate revelation of explosive power and undeniable romance. Chloe thought she was sacrificing her life for her company, only to discover that the quiet, grease-stained, single dad she brought into her home was the very king of the financial underworld. Together, they didn't just defeat their enemies, they built an unstoppable empire and a beautiful, loving family. If you love this intense story of hidden identities, billion-dollar betrayals, and true love conquering all, you do not want to miss what we have coming next. Please hit that like button, share this video with your friends who love a massive plot twist, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling, dramatic stories every single week. Let us know in the comments what you thought of Nathaniel's ultimate revenge.